Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Tita, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons, and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. All right, welcome everybody to the Next Level Human podcast. I know it's been a while since I have done an episode, but I have 2 of my colleagues, work colleagues, here with me in the weekend in Asheville, and we're doing some business stuff. And I want to really make this podcast more about conversations from here on out. I mean, obviously, I'll continue to do some of the content that I've been doing that you all are used to from me, where it's just sort of solo episodes. But I want to also have real conversations with people who are going through the next level human process. And so I've got my good friend LaRosa Johnson here, who does tech work, but also is in the sort of conscious community now. He has a YouTube channel, is putting out content in this place, and he comes at this mainly from a religious background, right? So he has more of a religious understanding, more moving towards this consciousness type of thing. And then Nicole Spencer, who's been a really good friend of mine for a very long time, and also a mentor of mine more recently in business, and myself. And we're going to be talking today really about this idea of what we might call the new consciousness or spirituality consciousness, and how people arrive here. And so let me set this up, and then we'll just going to have 3 friends just actually sitting around talking, sort of informally. But here's the thesis that I will present. From my perspective, when you look at the world of spirituality, we've kind of got 2 categories, and there doesn't seem much other room for it. One category is the religious category, right? So it's like this idea that you come at spirituality from a religion, Christianity, Islam, Judaism. It's these big 3, and that's kind of how you come at this. And then, of course, there are some lesser religions, but those are the big ones. And that's how most people say that's the domain of spirituality, and that's how you should deal with it. And then, of course, we have the New Age, sort of what you might call New Age, woo-woo, universe type of language that is sort of this broad, popular New Age philosophy that people talk about. So instead of talking about God and the Bible and sacred texts, they're talking about the universe and all of this kind of stuff. And I want to sort of explore a third path that I think myself, LaRosa, and Nicole are all converging on in different ways. And I'll just say one more thing here and then let Nicole and LaRosa sort of jump in and see if I've characterized this correctly. But from my perspective, it's sort of like LaRosa's coming from this place of more of a Christian religious background and moving into this, what I would call this third space that we'll define. Nicole is, I think, a little bit more agnostic in the way that she was raised, and kind of somewhere in the middle and sort of moving into this. And I actually am coming from, I was raised Catholic, but spent most of my adulthood as, I would say a devout atheist, someone who believed in essentially nothing, who now believes most definitely in something. And so I don't know if you all want to, where you want to start, but maybe I'll start with you, LaRosa, and just kind of get a sense of your story, your background, and how you sort of see this third space. And would you even say I characterized that appropriately for you?
I would say so. I think for me, it goes all the way back to my second great grandfather, who founded the church that my parents grew up in. Like my parents, grandparents, all of them went to that church. And so my family has a long history in the Christian faith as far back as I can trace it. And so for me, it's something that I grew up in from birth and haven't known anything other than that. And I'd always had an acumen for wanting to study the Bible, understand it, teach it to others. Even in my teenage years, that was something that I did that kind of set me apart from most of my friends. Like I didn't have too many friends because of that. But it led me down a path of wanting to know God more. But at the same time, I was also very analytical, very scientific, loved math and science. So those are my favorite subjects in school. And so there was always like the dichotomy of the two, trying to figure out how does science back up my Christian faith? And then knowing that most preachers, at least that I knew, were bivocational. So, all right, I'm going off to college, learn how to do something that's going to make me some money instead of going off to seminary. So I did that and realized that a lot of what I was going to learn spiritually, I was able to do on my own. And so, at least professionally, went off and just did what I thought I was going to do, like working with computers, which is what I enjoy, have always enjoyed. And it wasn't until I moved to Austin, Texas in 2007, where I really started taking a deep dive in theology, learning the biblical languages, Greek, Hebrew, like systematic theology, church history, like all the stuff that you would learn in seminary. I learned it in the local church. And so that was a great foundation for me. And also working for a Bible software company at the time. So not having to go spend money on books because being an employee, you get everything for free. And so that really helped solidify the foundation that I thought I needed at that time, and really stood for many years. Like, wrote books about it, have websites about it, and that's really where things took me. And then it was actually working with Nicole for business coaching that things started to take a little bit of a shift, because as a part of not only the business coaching, she really harked on needing to change your mindset. And that's what's really going to help you be successful in your business. And so as a result of that, bringing in people who thought differently about things, that was more on like what we would call like the woo-woo side of things, and looked at things from that side. And at first being very hesitant, like I would show up for all the calls because that's what I paid for. That's what I was going to do. And so did that. Was very hesitant. It was like, you know what? I'll listen. And then I just started seeing people's lives change and how it was impacting them. And then starting to work with some of the people that were in the group with me, working with them one-on-one, paying for them. And they had psychic gifts. And then someone else started getting into tarot. And so she offered a free reading one day, and I was like, you know what the hell? Let me just see what it says. Even though everything in my Christian faith was like, it's the occult, don't do it, it's divination. I was like, what's the worst that can happen? And so I get this reading, and it's like, wow, this is very insightful for where I am in this moment. And sure, you could look at it as this is very generic, and you can make it mean anything. But me knowing what my situation was at that time, what I was struggling with, this was very accurate in terms of what I needed to hear in that moment. And I was one to always believe that God can speak through anything and anyone. Like that was one thing that I always believed, because like going back to my Christian faith a little bit, it's really run the gamut of Christian doctrine. Start off like old school Baptist church growing up. My parents moved to a more charismatic church, so was very familiar with that. And then getting into more of the Reformed background, Calvinist, all that kind of stuff, more recently. And so my faith really ran the gamut. I was able to understand all of it. So with all of that, it really just started transforming things for me and started to have a more open mindset. And it started looking at other things like more recently, the telepathy tapes, and looking at the gifts of nonverbal autistic kids, because I have a kid who is severely ADHD and was recently diagnosed as autistic, although he's high functioning verbal, but having more of a compassion for that because of the community that I'm in. And so seeing that, then reading about near-death experiences, seeing other religions, reading about meditation and all that, it really just started to open my eyes and to see there's a little bit more to this than what the Christian faith says. And I started diving into quantum physics and all that stuff because I love the science and I want to back it up with science. And then that really just blew my mind. And from there, it's like, I still tell people that I hold to my faith. I hold Jesus in a very high regard, but at the same time, I am open to God or source or universe, whatever people want to call it. At this point, I don't really care because it's all just a word. And I'm open to hearing God speak wherever he wants to speak, however he wants to speak. And that is kind of the long and short of what's gotten me to where I am now.
Yeah, I love that. And before we get to you, Nicole, I want to just follow up on kind of what I heard. It's really interesting. Like I didn't realize you had this deep of a background in Christianity. I mean, you went deep into that world and were steeped in it. And it strikes me, the one thing that strikes me about what you said, it seems to me, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but you said something that's really interesting to me, that I was always one to see that God can speak to me in many ways. And that openness seems to have allowed you to hear, and at least in your perception and your filters, to see this as your connection to God, even if it didn't look like your Christian faith would necessarily spell it out. And I find that super interesting. And am I getting that right? That that's kind of how you came into this place? You just started being like, this feels too much like God, guiding me or speaking to me, and I can't ignore it.
Yeah. And there were just too many synchronicities that I couldn't ignore. Where, a perfect example, after I got that first tarot reading, I signed up with her to get a weekly reading after that, like every single week. So it's been like 3.5 years now at this point, getting a weekly reading. And I would also have a weekly call with a friend of mine where I was doing the coaching with her. And those two would happen around the same time on a Monday morning. So I get off the call, we'd be talking about coaching stuff, helping me grow my business. Get off the call, there's in my inbox is the tarot reading. They'll give it a listen. She's talking about the exact same thing that we were talking about on the call.
Wow.
With no context whatsoever to know that we were talking about that or anything. Because one of the things about the tarot reading that I get is she has no context for it whatsoever. It's what she calls her "what do you need to know now" reading. And so whatever she feels and sees, that's what she tells me. So she doesn't come to me for any context. She just tells me what she sees.
Yeah, and actually, so one thing I want to say about this before we get into Nicole's story is that it does seem to me that this is a theme as people start to move into this, let's call it third consciousness, or this third sort of understanding where it's not simply religion and it's not simply new age woo. It's this idea of tapping into a level of consciousness that is speaking in a sense, and they start paying attention to synchronicities and serendipities and signs in ways that you start going, this is just too pertinent and potent to just be a coincidence. And it seems to be to me that this is one of the first things that begins to happen as people move into this space. They start seeing this source consciousness as actually speaking to them in ways. And it's just really cool. I've had that experience, and it seems like you did as well. And I guess then I'll pick up with you, Nicole. So with your story, wherever you want to start it, but have you felt this same kind of, recognition that yes, I'm somehow feeling guided or in touch or being spoken to or getting signs and synchronicities and serendipities along the way? How did it happen for you?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to remember the origins, because as I was telling both of you, I had no religious background in my upbringing. My mom was raised Jewish, and by the time she was about to have a bat mitzvah, she said she didn't want one because she didn't believe. My dad was raised Catholic, but he was never particularly serious about it. So I had no exposure to anything. And even growing up here in the South in Asheville, North Carolina, I had a lot of friends who went to church. Sometimes I went and I still had really no idea what was going on. And I put pieces together that Christmas was a religious holiday on my own when I was in college, which might sound crazy to people, but there was just literally no discussion ever for any reason. And I actually remember I must have been like 4 or 5 years old. And I remember lying in bed and I was thinking about dinosaurs and how dinosaurs were once here and now they weren't. And so then I asked my mom, I was like, well, that happened with the dinosaurs, like what happens to me? And she's like, well, when you die, you just turn to dust. And that was a very terrifying thing to hear as like a 4 or 5-year-old. And I remember just crying myself to sleep for like multiple nights in a row after that. And she, of course, didn't mean any harm, but that's her belief. And it still is to this day. So I can't quite figure out how I ended up on this path. I think, as I built and sold my first business, I got really into just self-development and learning and reading. And I have a literature degree. I was an English teacher. So, at first I was reading all fiction and things like that for many, many years. And then as I started to shift into this self-development world, I think that is probably just what opened the awareness. And then it was kind of, after I sold my gym and I came back here to Asheville, which is a very, I would say, spiritually oriented community. And even though I wasn't, actively participating, I don't know, just things started to shift. And then people started to come into my life that really expanded the way I think. And I think that there was a transition in terms of that opening for me happening even before I realized it, because I was saying to you the other day, like, I go back and I, read the things that I wrote on social media, Facebook or whatever, like looking at my Facebook memories before I was even aware of this opening that was happening for me. And there were just certain pieces of language that I was using and certain energy in the words that were moving down that more spiritual pathway before I was even really aware of it. And then I was, as I said, introduced to a series of people, and you being a huge one, which is funny because when Jade and I met, like, he was not on this pathway in the way that he is now either. But, through experiences with you, through experiences of people you introduced me to, and just through connections and building businesses and really being in different masterminds and programs, and eventually doing some work with psychedelics and all kinds of spiritual support and mentorship, it just kind of evolved. And I think it evolved really more from a place of like curiosity versus seeking something. But then, yeah, you kind of arrive at this place when you dive in long enough and have enough experiences and have enough conversations where it's not something you can really deny. And I think I'm still, as much as I believe, and I would say I believe, with everything that I have, I'm also equally as skeptical of all of it still. So I don't know if that answered the question, but
Yeah, and I think it does. And I want to just give briefly my background, and then I want the three of us to discuss how we each engage with whatever this is. And for my background, well, I grew up Catholic, but after First Holy Communion, my parents, my mother's, really hippie 60 culture, that's what she really was a hippie. And they told me, do you want to continue with Catholicism? And I was 12 at the time, 10 at the time. I forget whatever First Holy Communion is, but I said no. And didn't think much of religion after that. But in my 20s, early 20s, late teens, early 20s, I started getting into some, what you all might describe as spiritual stuff. I started really getting deep into lucid dreaming. I started really getting deep into the idea of remote viewing and some of these things, and had some success with some of this. And then I went to medical school, and I actually did go to an alternative medical school, Bastyr University, which teaches alternative and functional medicine at a time where that really wasn't a thing. Like, it's mainstream now, but it really wasn't a thing. And all of that delving into spirituality just disappeared for me. And part of it, to be honest with you, is I did not like the woo. I saw the people that I went to school with is very anti-science. So this goes to what LaRosa was saying, very anti-science, very lack of an evidence base. I came up through with a biochemistry degree. Psychology was important to me. Evidence was very important to me. But towards the end of my time at that medical school, I had an experience that brought me back to my lucid dreaming experience. And this experience kind of has still shaken me to this day. And I was telling Nicole and Rosa about this experience, but I'll share with you all. I actually don't know that I've shared this experience ever on a podcast before, but I was sound asleep and I felt a hand on my back in my dream. And in my dream, this was my grandmother who had passed. I wasn't close to her at all. So there's no special necessarily relationship there, but she began to talk to me in this dream and told me that my sister, she told me a number of things I don't remember, but one of the things was that my sister was pregnant with a boy. And my sister at the time was in New York City. I was in Seattle. So I didn't see my sister much. But for whatever reason, she called me that day for some reason. That's back, we didn't have cell phones back then. This would have been 1999, 2000. Anyway, I'm kind of the class clown in my family. So I was like, how come you didn't tell me you were pregnant? I had this dream that you're pregnant and you're pregnant. She's like, I'm not pregnant. I'm on the pill. We're not planning on having kids. She had just met her boyfriend or met her fiance at the time. And they were 9 months into the relationship. She had no, reason, but I just stuck with it and made a joke about it and was like, well, you're pregnant and good luck with that. And of course I didn't think anything of it. 2 weeks go by and she calls me, goes, Jade, what the hell? I'm pregnant. Like, tell me everything about this dream. Now that stuck with me because as a person who was science-based, I could not explain where the hell I got this information from. And it also opened up my awareness that, in reality, when I was younger, I had several other experiences like this. Then it started making me think about how come if I'm thinking about Nicole, she'll call me or vice versa, or someone will be like, oh my God, you have these weird synchronicities and serendipities. And that started getting me studying things other than just, physiology and biochemistry and metabolism. That was the beginning. And that started getting me, now fast forward, into studying quantum physics and really sort of understanding how this works. And so it's really interesting on how we've all come to this, but I essentially got dragged, I think, kicking and screaming, but understanding as I was working with clients, seeing these patterns repeated in their lives, almost as if something was trying to get their attention. And this has brought me to the work with Next Level Human. And so I'll open this up for all three of us. Here's the way I see this, that since I've been working with thousands and thousands of clients as a coach and a clinician and a counselor. And that's really the role that I played my whole life. Clinician, sometimes I was a physician, sometimes a counselor, and I did couples counseling for a long time. And sometimes as a coach. And what I would see is two different things. If someone was on the wrong path, it seemed as if to me that they would have patterns repeat, right? They would be, and you probably know people like this from your life, right? They would have the abusive relationship. They would get out of that relationship. They would get in another abusive relationship. Or they would do one diet and have one health issue and then do that for a while and then get healthy and then not be healthy again and go back on the diet. Or they would have the same things in finance come up again and again and again. And I started to see that it seemed to me that this was like the perfect types of experiences to get these people to wake up. And then I would look at successful people and be like, wow, it literally seems like for them, it's the opposite. They constantly have these opportunities dropping in their lap, or this synchronistic thing happen, or this serendipitous event happen. And to me, slowly but surely, I started to see it was whether or not they were in alignment from my perspective with their authentic selves mission, in a sense. And this is how I started to begin to see this. And now I essentially feel like this is really what consciousness is doing. And so I'll open it up to both of you.
That was one of the things for me that kind of pushed me forward, was just seeing all those synchronicities and seeing things just come together that I just couldn't unexplain. Like they were there, I couldn't ignore them anymore. And even though my Christian faith said one thing, it was very adamant that no, this is of the devil, is demonic, or however they wanted to label it. I was like, well, I'm looking at this from a scientific perspective, and there are many things throughout history that the church has deemed witchcraft, heresy, or whatever, that they've later now claim as science and give it their backing. So I see this as me being on the front end of that, and it's really being able to sit with that and understand that there's something more going on here. And a perfect example for me was when I got into human design. It was one of those things where the first time I was introduced to it, looked at the chart, thought nothing of it. It's like, this is just nonsense, and I have no idea what I'm looking at. And then through doing some tech work, trying to figure out, all right, I need to do some better videos. Let me start looking at teleprompters. Find these teleprompters, videos on YouTube, and then this one channel, she had some really great videos. Watched a couple of her videos about teleprompters, reading from a script and all that kind of stuff. And then YouTube suggests this one video about human design. And then down the rabbit hole I go, finally understand it, pull up my chart again. I'm like, oh shit, this is a mirror to the last 40 years of my life in like a couple of pages worth of explanation. And I couldn't just ignore it anymore. And seeing, well, this is why things didn't go the way that I thought they would, or why things didn't work, or why I feel like me pursuing this particular path felt like an uphill battle, because that's not the way that I was designed or crafted to work with my energy. But then now that I've got that understanding, being able to put that into play, now things are starting to move because I've got that alignment. And just being able to see those things in action, along with all the other things that I'm looking at in terms of like the quantum physics and all those other things, it's just making a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, I love this idea, because here's another thing that I found with this whole process of learning to communicate with, let's just call it communicate with consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
This, and we can get into it if you all want, like the quantum physics aspect of it. But to me, one of the things that seems interesting to me is that there are many, many tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's astrology, and there's human design, and there's lots of different, there's, enneagrams and different things. And what I have found is that each person sort of comes to this work in a way. It's almost like, just like when I used to do metabolism, I used to get so upset at the idea that there was these one size fits all diets, because I'd be like, no, there is no one size fits all diet. There's the tools that work for you, and you have to create your diet. I'm starting to see this in the same way after being in this space of people learning to communicate with and dialogue with and react to this source consciousness. And it seems like they find particular tools that seem to speak through them. And in your, if we want to use the term of God, I would say, okay, so God, universe, source, however you're talking about, seems to speak in many different ways, but there's certain areas that we pick up. So for you, you're like, oh my gosh, now that I understand human design, I can decipher some of the messages through that tool. Right? Like, I don't really resonate with astrology at all. It never makes much sense, but I do know people who really get a lot from astrology in terms of it resonating and being very useful for them as they move through their lives. And so there's just these very different tools. Nicole and I know, also delved into psychedelics, which I feel like have a really direct access point, sort of a shortcut into a consciousness. I would say sometimes it goes a little too deep. Like, I much more prefer a more gentle, meditative breath work type approach now. But it is interesting that different tools bring you to different places, and certain people gravitate towards these tools. So now, instead of seeing these things as shamanism or tarot or human design or judging any of them, I don't judge any of them anymore. I just go, oh, this is interesting that for LaRosa, these particular tool sets help him get closer to source consciousness. And for Nicole, this tool set helps her get closer to source consciousness and be in dialogue. And for Jade, it's a different set of tools. Like science for me is actually, believe it or not, for a lot of people, they say, well, science is helping me get closer to source through, who would have known that would happen? But I'm curious how you see that.
Well, I mean, to your point, what you were just saying, I think that there's a million tools and pathways to all ultimately lead to the same outcome. I think it's why, the same principles ultimately apply across religions and cultures and, more ancient traditions and modern. We're all really seeking and working toward and ultimately saying something that's the same or very, very similar. But yeah, what was the actual question?
Well, and here's where I would love to go with both of you, and it goes to the same question. But so the idea for me is, why care, right? Like, why should we really go into this direction anyway? Because I have this hypothesis, and this is the question for you, I suppose. I think that as humans, what we want more than anything else is to matter and make a difference, to find meaning and purpose in our lives, to learn and to teach and to love, right? Like that's the thing. At the end of our lives, we want to know that we had experiences and learned. We want to know that we teached and contributed, that we mattered and we made a difference. And to me, I go, all religions seem to point to this idea that we're all connected in some way. And so then I go, so why go in this direction to begin with? Like, why should anyone listening to this be like, I want to learn some of this technology to speak and dialogue with consciousness in a different way than what religious said or the new age woo type say, but is more science-based and grounded, which is what we teach at Next Level Human. So I go like this. To me, the hypothesis says, because when you begin this dialogue process, life begins to appear magic. Outcomes begin to appear like they're happening for very specific reasons, and you begin to see the through line and the thread. And so I guess I'm interested in you is how you see that, because I know from your perspective, Nicole started a company when I first met that was called Authentic Conversion Marketing. And to me, it was a really interesting thing at the time, because what I saw was a lot of inauthenticity. And I've seen now that authenticity, to me, seems to be one of the things that aligns you with source and starts to allow you to listen to source. So I'm asking how you see that. A, why should people care about this? What has your journey been in this regard? And how do you feel like you've been able to have the success you've had? Because if I know you and I talk about this all the time, but I'd be curious how you see it. Do you feel like getting in alignment with this process and this source, even when you didn't know that you were in alignment, allowed your life to be richer, better, more fulfilled?
Well, I think, it led to being intuitively guided in ways that I don't necessarily even still recognize as they're happening. Meaning, like, I can trace where I am today in my life, which I'm so grateful is a level of, freedom, success, having really built a solid foundation for the rest of my life based on the work that I've already done. And I can attribute all of that to decisions and outcomes that happened many years before I was even on this pathway. Even years before I knew what my career was actually going to be. It's like, you can really just go back and connect all of these dots. And I always think of the, if you're a child of the 80s, like, you remember those choose your own adventure books, right? And so you can see, like, okay, if I choose option A, I end up here. If I choose option B, I end up here. And I think that if I go back and I really look at everything when I was at these kind of pivotal moments of decision throughout my life, I was just guided toward the right choices at the right times over and over again. And ultimately, even the timing of selling my business, like, when I actually thought about that and started that initial process, like, it made no sense. And it was on paper, probably not a great move because of how successful the business was and everything. But, just the timing of everything has worked out so perfectly. And I can even, trace losing animals in my life. And I obviously, you might be able to, if you're watching the video, my dog was in my lap and now she's back there, but I can see, really traumatic losses that I've had of other animals that led me to her. And she led me to traveling the world alone. And she comes with me and, and so just all of these it's almost synchronicities, but all of these, like, choose option A, choose option B, these moments of decision have ultimately led me here. And often I don't even really recognize how I'm being guided. And sometimes it's in very obvious ways, like a mentor or conversation suggesting something that I follow. But other ways, it's like very, very subtle and it's more gut instinct based. And I find I have, even still to this day, more people reflect how led by intuition I am than I can even see for myself. So it's a little bit hard to like explain and put my finger on. But the more work I've done, with my own just meditations and reading, and, at this point in my life, like I'm fully immersed in more, like, we'll call it like spiritual learning, right? So the books that I'm reading, the podcasts that I listen to, that type of thing. But it's been the work that I've done with my mentor Romy, who, funny enough, Jade introduced me to, Romy Weiser, if you want to look her up. She's been my spiritual guide and mentor for 4 years. Her work has completely shifted my perspective. As we've mentioned, the work with psychedelics has been transformative for me. As well as just hearing about other people's experiences. And the more time you spend in this space, the more things start to just be like, okay, this isn't a coincidence anymore. And the three of us are all kind of listening to a podcast now that really combines spirituality and science in a way that I think is really compelling and unique. And I think for those of us who have that really strong skeptical background, which we all do for different reasons, it's so important to be able to see enough evidence, right? And that evidence can come through actual studies. It can come through enough people reporting the same thing. It can come through our own experiences to where, we are ultimately latching on and still forming this thing that we're believing. Why is it important? I'm not really sure, but I think it's about, to what you talk about a lot, like playing this human game and finding love and compassion and becoming better people and impacting each other for the better. And even LaRosa was saying, we were at dinner last night, like going through this journey has helped you be more kind and empathetic and just loving toward people who you might have, judged or not understood before, which is, really at the end of the day, what's the point in all of this? I feel like you'd ask me something about my company, but I forgot.
No, I think, like, from my perspective, this is kind of where I wanted things to go. And I have one more line that I want to ask you all. But like, to me, just to frame kind of where we are, when I listen to LaRosa speak and I listen to what you just shared, and I think about my own experience and I think about what you, the listener, kind of want, I think like what really is going on here is that for those of you, there'll be some of you listening to this that you'll just be like, not my thing. I'm just not there. I don't understand this. And it's not something I want to open myself up to. But there's going to be a certain amount of people, and I think more and more and more, who are coming into the space and going, some of these things that I'm experiencing in my life seem, these patterns that are on repeat seem to just be trying to get my attention. Or when I listen in a particular way, it seems to be driving me to a place. And what I'm hearing from you, LaRosa, and you, Nicole, and that I see within myself is that there's a particular way to listen. Nicole listened in a particular way. It's different than the way LaRosa was listening. But if we hear LaRosa's story about, I'm on YouTube and I'm doing this thing, and this thing was introduced to me, but then it was introduced to me again. And for whatever reason, I felt compelled to do this. And then it, for whatever reason, it brings me down this path. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes sense here. This is kind of how this works. Like, I have a rule in my life where I'm like, if 3 different people tell me the same thing, I go and see it and see about it. If it's a book, if it's a show, if it's something I need to look into, because what I have found is that this is the way it seems to speak to me. Other people, it'll speak through, numbers, or it might speak through a book, or it might speak through a song or particular art or animals or whatever it is. The point is, there is a language here to be deciphered if you're willing to look at it. And when when you start to decipher it, it starts to feel like you are in a club all of your own. Life takes on this sort of magical quality. And it's almost like, I cannot believe this is actual reality. And so I guess to end, for all of us to wrap up, I would really just love for the listener to kind of get a sense of, how we each listen. And if you buy into that, for example, LaRosa, I would love to hear your take on, especially from someone that comes back from a very strong religious background, like how would you agree with me on that there is a particular way you listen? And as you started to listen, uh, magic has started to open up for you, because I think people can really relate to someone like you if they're from the religious background, where they go, oh my gosh, he's, perhaps speaking to God in a way that I hadn't thought you could speak to God, or that I had never talked about. So I'm just wondering, any tools, tips, tricks, wisdom that you can give from your experience that, like, look, here's how I'm using this and dipping my toes into the water of whatever you want to call it, source consciousness, God communication, universal alignment, and any insights you have with that.
Yeah, I think for me, the best way to explain how I'm listening is to talk about something that I heard recently on a podcast with where Thomas Campbell was being interviewed. And he talked about really what Source is trying to do is to lower the entropy. And the way that we do that, without trying to like overcomplicate it, is loving more in this world. And with my Christian background, we say God is love. That is like the highest expression of who he is. And then you look at every other world religion, it's all about living the golden rule and forgiveness, loving others. And so I've distilled a lot of my listening down to, is what I'm hearing causing me to love more? Is it pushing me towards loving, forgiving others? And if it's pushing me towards the opposite of that, then that's when I start questioning whether or not it's from the source.
I love
That's a great
that.
perspective. Yeah.
I love that. And I think of the same thing. I'll essentially say, I live by a rule where I go, which is very similar to what you're saying, where I say, the universe, to me, if I look around in nature and I look at source, I go, what is it? Well, it's inclusive. Everything's included. It has to be, because it's here. It's integrative, right? So it takes all these different things and brings them together to create bigger things out of it, evolves in a sense, right? And then it's holistic, meaning that it makes harmony with all these different things. And so to me, that inclusive, integrative, holistic nature is love. And to your point too, I go, anything that violates inclusivity, integration, holism, and love is something that, if it's divisive, if it's dehumanizing, if it's destructive to nature or anything that the universe contains, I go, that is not for me. And what's really interesting is, the more that I do that, the more I seem to be in alignment and authentic in my own way. Because think about it, right? Like, my difference, I'm very different than anyone else. There's never been another Jade. There never ever will be. There'll never be another LaRosa. There never has been. There's never been a Nicole. There never will be. You listeners, right? You are wholly unique. There will never be another you. And to me, I'm like, when you get into this inclusivity, this integration, this holistic nature, which to me defines love and what source really is, then you also own your own unique nature. And as soon as you do that, you're no longer playing the game of culture. You're no longer trapped by the noise. And all of a sudden, even your social media feeds start to show up in a way that learn and help you love and help you teach, versus just noise and nonsense. So I definitely second that. And I will say, with the social media, for me, I don't see it really the way that a lot of people see it. To me, it has been an extension of this communication process. I don't have a lot of destructive stuff that shows up on my social media feeds. It's not distracting so much. It actually helps me learn. It helps me teach. It helps me create and love more. Partly though, because I've aligned myself in a way that allows that algorithm to feed back to me. And I do think the algorithm of social media is analogous to what we're trying to say here. It basically is this idea that you get fed back what you pay attention to in these social media algorithms. I think when you're dialoguing with source consciousness, it's the same thing. As soon as you start to pay attention to division, dehumanization, and all these things, you get more of that back to you. As soon as you start thinking about love and inclusivity and integration and holism, you get more of that fed back to you. So I am seeing like source consciousness as one big algorithm, right? And so that's how I see it as well. I'm curious how you see it, Nicole.
Well, one thing I was going to say is, because I think this is important, that occurred to me is, maybe you were speaking last, is the fact that the three of us are sitting here doing this together right now, to me, is like the perfect example of following intuition, of being divinely led to certain moments in your life, right? So, you know, Jade and I have known each other for many years now. We met in, I would say, a pretty unlikely way, which you can share or not. And
Tinder for all of you. Shout out to Tinder.
But, you know, and we've had a complicated connection, you know, it's not been direct. It
hasn't been super easy along the way.
Like, yeah, but it's been wonderful. And we love and respect and appreciate each other. And even like with LaRosa, you know, you came into my business as a client at a time where, I mean, I was getting so many clients. It was like just insane. So you were a client, you know, in a big group of people, but there was just something that stood out about you, right? And I didn't know what it was for a long time. I was like, this guy just gets it. Like he hears everything I say and he can like repeat it back. And like, you showed up and I loved your, you know, how you showed up, but there was just always like something more there. And then eventually LaRosa came and worked for me and, you know, helped our clients with their tech and got his clients and all of this stuff. And I didn't even know until, I don't know, this year, that you were having all of this like kind of opening around your faith and your spirituality, until you really started sharing that. And you were so open to receiving things I wanted to share with you, and you like consumed it so fast. And, you know, then I, you know, referred you to Jade, and like, it's so, there are just so many things that had to happen along the way, and these like sparks of connection and just being led, and just to make certain decisions and have certain conversations that I think that's how we all end up where we are at any moment in life, right? It's just a series of choices and events, but there are certain moments where you find yourself and you're like, okay, this was guided to be here, I think. So,
yeah. And as we wrap it up, I would just finally say this: if you're listening to this and you're feeling intrigued, from my perspective, there is, for lack of a better term, let's just call it technology in quotes, a way of thinking, a way of being, a philosophy of engaging that allows you to be guided. And of course, this is what I want to be talking much, much more about, which is why I wanted to do this podcast, and was, you know, again, serendipitous, like literally, you know, synchronistic event to have the three of us all talking about this, as I was talking about Next Level Human and my business, and LaRosa and Nicole all helping me sort of hone in on the messaging. This is the perfect culmination of that. And there is a whole technology that, for those of you who want to engage in this work, believe it or not, it's not so amorphous and intangible. There are actually real tangible tools and techniques that we can use that do guide us, right? And so you can be taught how to tap in, how to listen, how to know the difference between intuition and instinct and intellect. That gets you sort of confused, how to know the difference between what is bubbling up from the unconscious as old wounds and what is actually the North Star of spirituality, how consciousness speaks to you, how to listen, how to engage. There is a whole set of tools and techniques here that Next Level Human teaches. So if you're interested in this, there's much, much more to come. So I want to just say thank you, LaRosa, for hanging out, and Sharon and Nicole. Really just love it. And thank you for you, the listener, for hanging out. And I know putting up with me for not putting up a podcast in a while, but hopefully this one was useful for you. So we'll see you at the next show.
You have been listening to the Next Level Human podcast with Dr. Jade Teta. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe and consider leaving a review. You make the biggest difference when you pass on your lessons and inspire others. That's why reviews like this are so powerful. Your words may be the only ones that resonate for someone else. Please remember, the information in this podcast is for educational purposes only. Always consult your personal physician or therapist before making any lifestyle changes. And finally, thank you for who you are in the world and the difference you make.